What's good, fam? What's good? You're here with your brother, the amazing self-becoming Jay, and you're tuned into An African-Centered Life, the YouTube channel dedicated to helping you live a life that honors your African ancestry. In this installment, I wanted to talk about the Pan-African principle of Sankofa, its relevance, and how we can use the principle of Sankofa to help us build happy individual lives as well as happy communal lives. So, what is Sankofa? Sankofa is an Adinkra symbol that reminds us that we should use knowledge gained from past experiences and observations to navigate life and plan for the future. On the individual level, this means reflecting on the events of your life so that you may better understand the course of your own life and better plan your life. And on the collective community level, this means using your people's history, tradition, and culture to guide and plan communal life. And by communal life, we mean the way that people treat each other in public, the values they share in common, and the customs, systems, and institutions built on those values. However, of course, and fortunately, everything that I just said could be summed up by the proverb that is related to Sankofa, which states that it is not taboo to go back for that which one has forgotten. Adinkra are symbols that originate from the Akan people of West Africa, found mostly in Ghana, Ivory Coast, and Togo. The Akan can be divided into many subgroups, and some of the most famous are the Ashanti and the Fante. Each Adinkra symbol represents a different concept, and usually has an associated proverb that reminds us of that concept. Adinkra cloth, fabric with Adinkra symbol stamped on it, was originally reserved for royalty. Adinkra cloth was worn during times of mourning and at funerals. This is in comparison to the related kente cloth, which is woven and worn at all sorts of special events. There are two basic forms of the Sankofa symbol. The most readily recognizable and well-known version is the image of a bird looking backwards. This backward-facing bird is sometimes depicted with an egg near its mouth. The egg represents the wealth of the past. The other form of the Sankofa symbol is a stylized heart. So what relevance, if any, does this old African concept have for modern-day Black people in these modern times, with all of its modern conveniences and its modern concerns? In order to understand this question within the proper context, it's necessary to be able to see the world from an African-centered perspective, by which we mean being able to view the world and events through the lens of African cultural norms and patterns in African history. The African-centered worldview or perspective rests on certain axioms. For example, Black or African civilization is unique, African culture is good, and African culture is necessary in order to produce happy and healthy Black individuals, families, and communities. Another tenet of the African-centered perspective is that African history is instructive for African people. Now, looking at the world from said African-centered perspective, one can't help but notice that in spite of everything, in spite of leaps in technology, in spite of overall general human progress, in spite of the date on the calendar, wherever you find Black nations and populations, they usually trail behind non-Black nations and populations in all indicators of standards of living, from health to life expectancy and economics. Now, in order to understand why that is, why in 2025 Black nations and populations trail behind most others, one doesn't have to look that far back into African world history. A brief study of events brings the answer into such clear focus, makes the answer to that question so obvious that to deny such is to readily admit either ignorance on the subject or an ulterior motive, or both. At any rate, the answer to that question is that Black nations and populations find themselves in such a position as a result of the historic, and in some cases ongoing, domination and antagonism of Black nations and populations by non-Black nations and populations. On the continent of Africa, that domination took the form of 80 years of European imperialism. This was a time when nations like Great Britain, France, and Belgium extracted the physical resources of Africa in order to enrich European monarchs and businessmen.
These raw materials are shipped direct from the Firestone plantations in Liberia, on the west coast of Africa.
Over a third of all the gold produced in the world comes from our mines on the Rand.
The consequences of European imperialism in Africa are still with us today and are evidenced by things like the region's general poverty and underdevelopment, the continued predatory economic relationship between former imperial master and imperial subject, and the destabilization of African governments and the assassination of African leaders that advocate for better living conditions and complete sovereignty for the people that live there. In the African diaspora in the Americas, that domination took the form of white men and women building generational wealth off of the labor and actual physical bodies of black men and women. The consequences of slavery and the racially stratified societies it produced is observable via the lower living standards of black populations in multiracial former slaveholding countries like the United States or Brazil, as referenced earlier. The attempt by non-blacks to control all things black for their own benefit was never limited to attacks on African lands or bodies. Just as significant, if not more so, has been the attack on the African psyche and mind. This attack has been maintained through outsider control of the images, and information the world and black people themselves receive about black people. The cumulative effect of non-black control of black images, information about black people, black bodies through slavery, and black lands through imperialism has had a twofold psychological effect. On the one hand, it has made non-African peoples feel superior when compared to black people. This belief in non-African superiority not only absolves the perpetrators of historical crimes and atrocities against black people, but also lays the groundwork for the justification of any ongoing or yet to be committed future offenses. And on the other hand, outsider domination and antagonism has had a detrimental effect on the psyches of black people. On the individual level, it has caused many to be ashamed of their African ancestry and always assume the worst about their black brothers and sisters. And collectively, it has caused black populations the world over to doubt the usefulness of African culture and to more or less view African history, black history, as just one long story of the sufferings of a backward and primitive race. Which brings us back to the question of the relevance of Sankofa in the lives of modern-day black people. The real question is, what has our current mindset gotten us? At this point in human history, in 2025, what can any black population anywhere in the world say that they have achieved as a result of self-hate, cultural ignorance, and historical amnesia? Better communities, better living standards, first-rate nations? No, not hardly. It would seem that we need another way. And that other way is our way. To return to the all-important theme of history, a study of our history provides proof undeniable that we are at our best, strongest, richest, most powerful, most awe-inspiring, only at those times in history when we faithfully follow our culture and ways as handed down to us by our ancestors. In light of our glorious past and our current situation, The relevance of Sankofa in the lives of modern-day Black people and populations all over the world cannot be denied. Sankofa demands that we remember the old ways in order to be able to stride confidently into the future. Sankofa calls on Black people everywhere to use African cultural tools to undo what outsider domination and antagonism have done. It is the mission of this channel to help you answer that call by informing you about fundamental Pan-African cultural concepts. By Pan-African cultural concepts, we mean ideas that were promoted and practiced by different Black people at different times, in different places, all over the African continent. In this way, we believe that we can get an idea of the nature of African civilization as a whole, and not just glimpses into certain cultures in certain places at certain times. For example, the West African Akan concept of Sankofa is echoed in the Central African Bakongo concept of Kisinsi. Kisinsi is an idea that stresses a respect for and an adherence to traditional ways. And in the classical African civilization of ancient Kemet, also known as Egypt, we are confronted with the Sankofa concept yet again, this time via the words of the royal advisor Ptahhotep. Do not alter the teaching of your ancestors, but try to make it better if you can. So, in summary, fam, if you can see the usefulness and understanding in studying our history, if you can see the beauty in our culture, if you can see the need to understand, practice, and live our culture, you're already practicing Sankofa in the way that you can. We here at An African-Centered Life will do our part by helping you fill in the gaps. And in this way, you will be able to participate in your own people's cultural and spiritual reawakening. The kind of change that we need if Black people are ever to overcome the obstacles in their way to building the healthy, just, sane, prosperous societies they so much desire and deserve. So that's going to do it for this one, folks. Thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, you support the unique mission of this channel, drop us a like, a comment, subscribe, share the video with someone who you think could appreciate it. Again, this has been another installment of An African-Centered Life. You've been kicking it with your brother, the amazing self-becoming Jay, and we added that like yesterday.